Presentation is on Australia. Australia, officially known as the Commonwealth of Australia, is a sovereign country comprising the mainland of the Australian continent and the island of Tasmania, and numerous smaller islands. It is the largest country in Oceania and the world's sixth largest country by a total area with population of 24.99 million as of 2018. Impacts of other countries. The culture of Australia is primarily a Western culture, to some extent derived from Britain, but also influenced by the unique geography of Australia and cultural input of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, and other Australian people. The British colonization of Australia began in 1788, and waves of multi-ethnic migration followed. Evidence of the significant Anglo-Celtic heritage includes the predominance of the English language, the existence of a democratic system of government drawing upon the British traditions of Westminster government, parliamentarism, and constitutional monarchy, American constitutionalist and federal traditions, Christianity as the dominant religion, and the popularity of sports originating in or influenced by the British Isles. Australian culture has diverged significantly since British settlement. Australia has been influenced by migrant cultures from over 30 countries, but of these, the strongest cultural influences up until the Second World War were British and Irish, with the highest percentage of immigrants into Australia being of British or Irish origin. Colonial powers. The first fleet of British ships arrived at Botany Bay in January 1788 to establish a penal colony, the first colony on Australian mainland. In the century that followed, the British established other colonies on the continent, and European explorers ventured into its interior. Rulers. The Prime Minister of Australia is the head of government in Australia. The Prime Minister is the leader of the federal government and is also accountable to the federal parliament under the principles of responsible government. The incumbent Prime Minister is Scott Morrison, who took office in August 2018 as leader of the Liberal Party. The Queen. The present monarch is Queen Elizabeth II, styled Queen of Australia, who has reigned since February 6, 1952. She is represented in Australia as a whole by the Governor-General in accordance with the Australian Constitution and letters patent from the Queen, and in each of the Australian states according to the state constitutions by a governor assisted by the Lieutenant Governor. Golden Age. According to the federal government's Productivity Commission in 1999, economic conditions had never been better. If the 1960s and 1970s were the golden age of growth and output and productivity, it seems we might need to reach for an even more superlative term for the 1990s. Its latest research paper states the acceleration in productivity growth in the 1990s is outstripping any earlier results. Its research paper says productivity growth accelerated to 2.4% a year during the 4 years to 1997 to 1998 and has been sustained since, compared to a long-term average of 1.4%. It attributes the boom to structural reforms, technological advancements, and management improvements, as well as reduced staffing levels. The analysis shows the Australian economy to have taken a new growth path, which has opened up possibilities for faster growth and more rapid improvements in living standards. Australia's independence. The first fleet of British ships had arrived at Sydney Harbour in 1788, founding the first of what would involve the 6 self-governed British colonies, which are New South Wales, Tasmania, South Australia, Western Australia, Victoria, and Queensland. The last British garrisons had left Australia in 1870. At the beginning of the 20th century, nearly 2 decades of negotiations on federation concluded with the approval of a federal constitution by all 6 Australian colonies and subsequent ratification by the British Parliament in 1900. This resulted in the political integration of 6 Australian colonies into one federation, Australian Commonwealth, formally proclaimed as on January 1st, 1901. Melbourne was chosen as the temporary seat of government while a purpose-designed capital city, Canberra, was constructed. The future King George V, then the Duke of York, opened the first Parliament of Australia on May 9, 1901, and his successor, later to be King George VI, opened the first sixth session in Canberra during May 1927. Australia became officially autonomous in both internal and external affairs with the passage of the Statute of Westminster Adoption Act on October 9, 1942. The Australia Act of 1986 eliminated the last vestiges of British legal authority at the federal level. Critical events of Australia. The Eureka Stockade. The Eureka Rebellion, often called the Eureka Stockade, is an important event in the development of Australian democracy and Australian identity. On December 3rd, 1854, in Ballarat, the rebellion occurred because the diggers opposed the government's mining license. This event is often considered the birthplace of Australian democracy, as it marks a time of revolt against oppression. The Eureka flag is still considered a symbol of Australian independence. Australian women's suffrage. Women's suffrage in Australia is one of the earliest goals of the gender equality movement in Australia. It began to be socially and politically acceptable and legislated in the late 19th century, beginning with South Australia and Western Australia. The women's suffrage movement drove Parliament through the 1902 Federal Franchise Act, allowing Australian women over 21 to vote in national elections and stand for the Australian Parliament. Important world problems: overfishing and illegal fishing. Overfishing has already decreased part of Australia's fish stocks to a dangerously low level. Two major factors account for this problem: the fact that some areas have low biological productivity and hence fish stocks do not regenerate quickly, along intensive fishing efforts by commercial and recreational fisheries. Australian wildfires. Nearly 3 billion animals were affected by Australia's worst wildfire season that burned from last July through March. Scientists announced a figure almost 3 times higher than the original estimates. A report released commissioned by the Worldwide Fund for Nature Australia said that 46 million acres were scorched. An estimate in January said 1.25 billion animals were affected. The affected wildlife includes 143 million mammals, 2.46 billion reptiles, 180 million birds, and 51 million frogs. Traditional allies. Australia's traditional allies include Japan and China. Australia and New Zealand are natural allies with a strong trans-Tasman sense of family. At a government-to-government level, Australia's relationship with New Zealand is the closest and most comprehensive of all our bilateral relationships. Traditional enemies. Australia doesn't have any known enemies at this point in time, and although they are allies today, Japan and Australia were once enemies during World War II. World affairs. Australia's top foreign affairs official has warned Beijing will seize on bitter debates over foreign policy on China to portray Australia as an intolerant country. The Secretary of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Francis Adamson, made the comment in the wake of a series of controversies in Canberra over race and foreign policy. Earlier this month, 3 Chinese Australians accused Liberal Senator Eric Abetz of McCarthyism after he asked them to condemn the Chinese Communist Party during a committee hearing. Labor has been ratcheting up its attack on Senator Abetz over the episode, accusing him of subjecting the witnesses to a loyalty test. A reputation. Australia is ranked highly for its safety, security, and peacefulness, its openness and willingness to engage in investments, and its well-educated and reliable workforce. Australia's appealing lifestyle and effective government were also factors. It was one of only 3 non-European countries to make the top 10. Australia's high ranking can be attributed to factors including universal and high-quality healthcare and a government-funded tertiary education. Australia's move to ban firearms in the 1990s has helped to reduce gun violence and improve the feeling of safety and security. Sydney has been named the world's friendliest cities for tourists. Melbourne has been ranked one of the world's most livable cities. Canberra is also ranked by the OECD as one of the best places to live in the world. Thank you for listening.
Thanks. I went to Teachers College in Canberra. It's a nice.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. It's cool because the whole city's planned, right? It was all mapped out and everything and designed. It's cool to go to cities like that. Thanks for sharing.
Of course. Also, are there a lot of shark attacks there?
Pardon me?
Are there a lot of like shark attacks or like animal attacks because of the dangerous type of wildlife?
What is it? What do they say? Like 8 out of the top 10 most dangerous animals live in Australia or something?
Yeah, that's true. But while you were there, did you hear of anything like super major happening?
No, not really. Not really. But I did see snakes and all that stuff, It's crazy stuff. But it's a beautiful place. All right. How about Jacob? Did Miriam show up? I see her there, but she's not there yet. Miriam, just announce yourself. Tell me you're here. No? Okay. So, Jacob, what are you thinking? Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
You see it?
Yes.
Okay. So this is about Sweden. Starting with what nations of groups of people have impacted this country. So the Kalmar Union was the idea started in 1389 when Denmark, Norway, and Sweden were united under a single queen. But the union didn't actually form until 1397. So eventually, this lasted for a long time, but internal conflicts led to the Stockholm bloodbath, where around like 80 nobles were executed by the Danish king. And this was obviously not going to hold anymore. So this started a rebellion, and that led to the deposition of Christian II and seizure of power by Gustav Vasa. And Gustav Vasa is recognized as the first king of Sweden. So the Golden Age of Sweden, many consider to be the Swedish Empire or the Great Era of Power. So Gustav II Adolf, it was King during time, and he was probably one of the most powerful monarchs. So basically, because Sweden owned Finland, provinces in northern Germany, and present-day Baltic republics. The Peace of Westphalia was a treaty that ended the 30 Years' War and brought peace to the Roman Empire. So basically, this guaranteed that there were no like conflicts happening, and because there was just 30 Years' War. And Treaty of Roskilde basically was Denmark signing off a bunch of their land to Sweden because of their like strong conquest, and Sweden continued to push this conquest. And then due to its agrarian economy, which means that like much of their money comes from like the land and like making money off the land, it couldn't have enough resources to stay at the top. So how to achieve independence? The Vasa period is the period starting from the reign of Gustav Vasa, which is right after the Kalmar Union. So at this point, the church was nationalized, estates were confiscated by the crown, which means that like privately owned land was taken away by the crown. Protestant Reformation, power was concentrated into the king, and hereditary monarchy came into force. What is the relationship of boundaries to historical, ethnic, and tribal boundaries? So ethnic groups in Sweden are generally pretty diverse. It is like it's pretty like middle of the pack immigrant country when you look at it in the whole picture. Finland as its neighbor is probably the most notable country with any ethnic representation in Sweden. There's actually not much from like Norway or like neighboring Nordic European countries. The Sami are actually a indigenous tribe indigenous tribe in Sweden that have stayed there for like a really long time. So there are a few of those. Significant military, political, economic, and social events that have shaped Sweden's views. So military history involves a lot of people know this, and the Vikings actually sort of impacted Sweden's military history. So basically, they involved plundering expeditions and trading. And I mentioned before that Sweden had a pretty good conquest in Denmark, where they managed to take a lot of land. So definitely that was influenced by their Viking predecessors. They participated in numerous wars in the times of Viking, and this coincided with their culture of like plundering and stuff. History. So but currently they are known as a big peacekeeping country, as they have participated in neither world wars, and they really tried to avoid any conflicts since the Napoleonic Wars. So something that changed their economic view was the 1930 depression, and this is like one of the effects of this. This was the depression that basically started in the United States, and it spread throughout the world because the United States, kind of like the trade center. So unemployment rate went up a lot, and Swedish exports fell. So how they dealt with this, called the Swedish model. So the first priority was fighting unemployment, and they called it like a middle way between capitalism and a central planned economy. So to summarize it, or how to summarize it would be a large, probably owned industrial sector, a large public sector financed by taxes, a large trade union movement, a state that plays an active role in labor market politics, and the ambition is to achieve an even distribution of income and wealth. And this worked pretty well. So what does your country see as the most important world problem? One thing that Sweden keeps their eyes on is environmental issues. They have made themselves known as like one of the countries that cares about this like a lot. They had a thing where they prohibited the selling of plastic bottles that don't comply with an improved recycling program. So this basically forces all plastic bottles to be recyclable. The Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management was created, and it handles most of the water pollution issues. And they have said that they have a goal to reach zero net greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and currently have some of the lowest emissions in Europe. One thing Sweden actually didn't take very seriously is the response to COVID. The government, they didn't really see anything. They didn't really see it as super serious. They didn't even like really encourage people to wear masks that much because they believed there was like low evidence, or like a lot of people believe there was not a lot of evidence in like face masks helping. So yeah, that's something that's not too great by Sweden. So traditional allies and enemies, Sweden actually for a long time has not had many like enemies or like really allies, but probably like their closest, like one of their friends would be like Denmark, even though they kind of like conquered them like a really long time ago, but so that's like, but they still have a pretty like tightly knit relationship with them as a neighbor and countries. So how does it see its role in world affairs? One thing I think many people see from Sweden is that it's a peacekeeper. They don't like, I'm sure if you ask anyone like what's Sweden like about Sweden, they wouldn't say Sweden is like aggressive at all. They kind of like stay off to the side and try not to get involved too much. So what is my country's reputation in the world? How do others view Sweden? So according to the country rep track, Sweden earned, which is like country rep track is a system that like basically it calculates like how quote unquote good a country is. So Sweden earned number one for like 2 years in a row for the top 10 rankings of reputation. They're highly transparent with low corruption, so that's makes them pretty good in ethical behavior. And they score excellent as a country that's friendly, safe, beautiful, offers an appealing lifestyle, enjoyable, ethical, transparent, and low in corruption. Yeah, that's Sweden.
What about IKEA?
I'm sure they had a really big part in Sweden's economy.
All right. Cool. Thank you. Who's next? We still have Dina and Edwin. Edwin.
Oh, sure, I can present.
All right.
Um, okay, so my okay. So my presentation is on the Republic of Ireland. Ireland doesn't have a lot of population. Its population is only 5 million people. It has a unitary parliament republic, and its main languages are Irish and English. So Ireland has a very long history. It starts from the Stone Ages, but I'm not gonna get into that. A lot of people have influenced it. First, the Celts, the Vikings, and then the Normans have invaded it, and then most of its history is its battles with the English. It had a union with Britain, which didn't really benefit either side, and there was a century of conflict between them. And it had a history of conflict between the Catholic South and the Protestant dominated North, which the North always had a terrorism problem in the recent history. There was violence from the 1970s to 80s, and the South and North separated. Mm-hmm. So, outer influence. Britain had a lot of influence on Ireland, culturally, economically, from all sides, and also the Roman Empire, which brought Christianity and Catholicism to Ireland. The Roman Catholic Church sent several saints to Ireland, which have been credited with converting the Irish to Christianity. Also, they have been invaded by the Norse kingdom, like Norway and Vikings, multiple times, which they made cities and started trading in their country. Some interesting facts are during the Irish famine, the Ottoman Empire sent them £1,000 for famine relief and a lot of help. Also, they've had a relationship with the Native Americans because they also helped them during the famine, and their cultures have been just really close. So I think the British monarchy has had the most impact on Ireland throughout history because they've been part of the British Empire. Mm, there were a lot of rebellions against that government by the Irish, and just over 1 million Irish died during the Great Famine, which so the rulers and colonial powers. So in the early years, like Ireland was organized into a number of petty kingdoms or clans that were practically separate, and it wasn't until the 10th century that they had a king. The country was divided into 5 groups known as the Five Fifths in the start of the Christian era. And surrounding the king was the aristocracy that owned land and property rights. So the basic economy of the country was always cattle rearing and agriculture. And at that time, there were a lot of clan fights and clan claims to kingship, and a lot of invasions by the Normans. Mm. Basically, after the 1500s, it was pretty much ruled by the British, and the reforming popes encouraged Henry II's invasion of Ireland, believing that it would further church reform in that country. The recognition of Henry II as Lord of Ireland and the linking of church to a foreign destroyed the independence of Gaelic Ireland and put the country in a position of subordination. So I think the golden age of Ireland was in the early Christian period from 400 to 1000 AD. At this time, most of the Europe was going through dark ages, but Ireland was going through a period of religious fulfillment and prosperity. There were a lot of monasteries at this time, and they had a lot of trade and settlement patterns change. And their power was the most powerful during their fall of Roman Empire, and they even conquered some parts of England and Wales. So this is the story of the independence. First, they had the revolutionary period from the 1910s to 1920s, and then there was the Irish War of Independence, partition of Ireland, and civil war. So the Irish War of Independence was a guerrilla war, which means it was an irregular war between the Irish Republican Army and British forces from 1919 to 1921, and it was a result of conflict of the revolutionary period. So the revolutionary period was when the opinion changed from the home rule supporting Irish parliament to the Irish Republican movement. Basically, the Irish wanted independence from the British government, and there was a lot of civil unrest and trade unions and violent insurrections that led to the War of Independence, which created Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland is one of the 4 countries of the United Kingdom. It's a region of United Kingdom, and was created as a separate legal entity under the government of Ireland. It's an autonomous part that was formed from 6 of the 9 counties in Ireland. So, in large part, Unionists, at least in the Northeast, supported its creation. It's important to know that in the like they were separated by religion as well. So the Ireland was separated in May 1921 and was partitioned under British law by the Government of Ireland Act, which created Northern Ireland. There was wars going on back then, so they agreed to cease fire on 11 July 1921. So after the ceasefire, they signed the Anglo-Irish Treaty on December 1921, which ended British rule in most of Ireland. And After a 10-month transitional period overseen by a provisional government, the Irish Free State was created as a self-governing dominion on December 1922. Northern Ireland, however, remained in the United Kingdom. So after they were parted, there was a lot of violence in Belfast in Northern Ireland going on and fighting in the borders, and it was mostly by the IRA, the Irish Republican Armies, and the IRA launched a failed Northern Offensive in May 1922. In June 1922, disagreement among Republicans over the Anglo-Irish treaty led to the 11-month Irish Civil War. So some significant events that we already talked about is their independence and the Civil War, also World War II and World War One, obviously, and they also impacted their social because they got separated from part of Ireland. Another important social event, like I said, was the introduction of Catholicism, especially since the Irish have been discriminated against because of being Roman Catholic by the British for so long. And the Great Famine affected them both socially and economically. Before it ended in 1852, it resulted in the death of roughly 1 million people. So if you look at the graph, their population dropped drastically. And a lot of Irish people had to leave their homes as refugees, which led to the Irish diaspora. So you can find people of Irish descent in many countries. So they also had a financial crisis in 2008, which they fell into recession for the first time since the 1980s. And at this time, again, the immigration and unemployment escalated to the levels that they haven't had for a long time. So, worldview. Ireland ranks 6th in economic freedom in the 2020 index. However, 88% of people are concerned about affordable housing in Ireland and 79% in Northern Ireland. 90% of people were concerned about the lack of jobs, and 65% in the Republic of Ireland. And 53% of people in the Republic feel good about the future of their country. So one of the biggest problems right now is the housing crisis. In the 2013, the Irish government said that they would eradicate the homelessness, but in 2017, the problem only got worse, and it rose by 25%. Between 2016 to 2017, there were only 4,400 people living in emergency accommodation, which was already a high figure for Ireland. But in mid-2019, that number rose to 10,000 people, with about 1/3 of these people being children. Also, 95% of people in Ireland have said that they consider climate change a serious problem, and 26% said climate change to be the single most serious problem facing the world. After their election, they were supposed to have their greenest government ever. And they also believe that the government is the main group responsible for tackling climate change. So for foreign relations, their foreign relations are mostly influenced because they're by their membership in the European Union, and their biggest allies are the UK and US, but mostly they stay neutral in foreign policies. They're not a member of NATO, but they have participates in Partnership for Peace, so they help other countries and they provide support to US and its allies. But overall, like I said, they don't have any enemies because they mostly stay neutral. They don't have any official enemies. and they haven't been involved in military conflicts since World War I as a result, like not including the wars they had with themselves. And even though they don't officially have enemies, their relationship with Russia, Israel, and Northern Ireland haven't been good. And some people might think that their relationship with the United Kingdom is also not good, but I think that's just in the past. So with Russia, there was an attack, and Ireland expelled a Russian diplomat in solidarity with Britain. And they don't have a very good relationship with Israel because they arrested the Irish aid ships and aid workers uh, that were going to help Palestine. And their relationship with Northern Ireland is always very like problematic, because only recently they've removed they removed the article that the illegal territorial claim, and they now accept the legitimacy of Northern Ireland. And they have had a good relationship with, like I said, with the Native Americans, Turkey, like most countries they have a good relationship with. And they have a good relationship with India as well, because they have been much in common, and they were both occupied by the British. So here are some famous Irish people you might know. And they've been ranked in 11th out of 55 countries in a new survey ranking nations by their reputation. They're mostly viewed positively, like they're viewed as nice people, but there's some stereotypes about them, like they're all redheads or drunk, and like they like Irish clover and drink beer, which are just stereotypes. In the end, they're not that true. And yeah, that's it. So anybody know the people in here?
I know Niall Horan. No, they're all familiar.
Well, that's Liam Neeson, obviously, but that poet guy, what's his name again? Oscar Wilde. Okay.
Alright, that was the answer.
Thank you. We got Edwin.
Hi.
Hello.
Sir, do I need to share this presentation with you? Like, submit it?
Yeah, what is it? Yeah, everyone should probably submit it. Why not?
Okay.
Okay, hey everyone. So today I'll be talking about Greenland. So starting off with the timeline, the first remnants of humanity were found around 2500 BC. However, it's impossible to tell what kind of people settled here because they left nothing behind really. And then in the 10th century, nearing the end of the Viking Age, Eric the Red, a Norwegian Icelander, was exiled from Iceland for manslaughter. So along with his friends, family, and some slaves, he discovered Greenland in the northwest. He chose to name it Greenland in hoping that the pleasant-sounding name would attract people to settle there. It has also been confirmed that the temperature at the time could have been suitable for green life, meaning that the name could also hold merit, although today it's mostly ice. And then, 300 years later, the first Inuit ancestors migrated to Greenland, and the previously mentioned Norse settlers and their settlements had disappeared for unknown reasons. Until 1721, Denmark-Norway, a multinational real union that is known today as two separate political entities, falsely believed that they had colonized this land, as they still thought their settlements remained intact and claimed sovereignty. There are official documents dating in this time period that wrongly claimed that Greenland was a Denmark-Norway colony. Then, in 1721, an expedition was sent to Greenland from Denmark-Norway to reinstate Christianity, believing that the Norse settlers may have converted it or reverted back to paganism. Obviously, they didn't manage to find any, but they did find the Inuits that had settled there, and they baptized them instead. And then they then set up coastal trading colonies, a trade monopoly, and other colonial privileges in the area. Denmark-Norway would eventually break the union in 1814, and Denmark claimed the colony of Greenland afterwards. And during World War II, Germany invaded Denmark on April 9th, 1940. And due to this, Greenland turned to the United States for assistance in the place of Denmark. After the war had concluded, Denmark resumed complete control over Greenland. It wasn't until May 1st, 1979 that Greenland gained partial independence from Denmark. They were given home rule, meaning certain things are controlled by the Greenlandic government, but things like foreign policy or national defense or the legal system remain under the control of Denmark. Greenland actually chose not to be fully dependent from Denmark, instead choosing to rely on them for many things. They can become fully independent if they choose to, although a referendum would need to be approved. And Greenland has yet to achieve a true golden age, so to speak, but they have consistently continued to grow as a country, so perhaps we can expect to see a golden age in the coming years. So Greenland has been a colony for a very long time. So until 1814, the King of Norway, and at some point Denmark-Norway, was the ruler of Greenland as well officially. After 1814, with the abolishment of the Union, Greenland was under Denmark's rule, and so Denmark's ruler also became Greenland's ruler. They have the same political system as we have in Canada of constitutional monarchy, where we recognize the royal family as head of state, but our prime minister is the head of the government. So the pictures show King Frederick VI, the last Norwegian ruler, and Margrethe II, the current ruler of Denmark and thus Greenland. And this is their current prime minister, Kim Kielsen. And currently, Greenland is dealing with COVID pretty well, with only 17 confirmed cases today, and 16 of those have already recovered. You can see from the graph here, the past few months, the number of cases, and it's pretty low amount. And he's established a lot of policies that have prevented the widespread of COVID, especially in terms of tourism or migration. And he is heralded by some as one of the best examples of a world leader in regards to dealing with the epidemic thus far. So as I've said, Greenland is under Denmark's rule, meaning that in terms of international affairs, they sort of follow along with whatever the Danish decide to do. So Greenland is for the most part a bystander for world affairs, perhaps due to their isolated geographical location or their lack of strength or finances in comparison to major powers that makes it unlikely that they would choose to take part. They have diplomatic relations with Belgium, Iceland, the US, and plan to establish them with China in the near future. Regardless, Denmark's allies are considered Greenland's as well. And Greenland doesn't really like to involve itself in international shenanigans usually, and so doesn't have any real enemies. Although in the past few decades, there has been a small dispute between Canada and Greenland over this small island called Hans Island with an area of 130 hectares or 1.3 square kilometers, located in the middle of the territorial limits for both countries, meaning that it can be claimed by either of them according to international law. However, this dispute consisted of Canada and Greenland playing a game of capture the point, where they would just leave their flags on the island along with a bottle of whiskey and take down the opposing country's flag. So, and as good as a recurring game it was, in 2018 they decided to resolve this issue by drawing a border down the middle and claiming each side of it. So if you had to ask Greenlanders what's the biggest problem the world faces right now, I'm sure many would say climate change. 79% of Greenland's ice, or around 1,700,000 square kilometers. This is mainly from the Greenland ice sheet. As you can see on the map, the whitish blue areas are, the whitish bluish areas are where ice and snow can be found. And in the 1990s, scientists monitored the effects of global warming in many places. And it found that Greenland was not being affected heavily, and the glaciers were shrinking at an extremely slow rate. and thus assumed that Greenland would not face any immediate danger from the changes in climate. However, since then, it's approximated that the ice sheet is melting 6 times faster than it was in the 1990s. During the summer of 2019, a heat wave hit, and enough ice was melted to fill around 4 million swimming pools worth of water over the span of a single day, according to a calculation by National Geographic. So as stated in this quote, the rapid melting of this ice surprised many scientists, and perhaps it alludes to the fact that global warming has gotten drastically more problematic in the past few decades, or even years. If the entire ice sheet in Greenland were to melt, around 25 feet of water would be added to the world's oceans, although fortunately this isn't slated to happen for a couple hundred years. However, if global warming continues to be a bigger and bigger problem, that estimate could potentially be way off. So here my works cited, and that concludes my presentation. Thanks everyone for listening.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Did Edward show up? No? Okay. Let's take a 10-minute break. Okay. BRB.